Fáilte to How to Be Irish. We have a guest today that is going to be talking to us about Ireland's social history. It is Deirdre O'Neill, and this is her book. It has come out quite recently, so it's in shops. It's called Remnants of Our Past, and it's basically an introduction to Ireland's social history. Fascinating stuff. I literally read this all in one go. I thoroughly enjoyed it. There's loads of fab photos as well. It's a lovely, lovely book, like to read, to have in the house, to browse through. It basically tells the stories of our Irish ancestors, and it uses clues that we see like hidden in our landscape and what those things were used for or how they were part of our everyday lives. So everything from food to fairs to fairies, all of those kinds of things are covered in this book. And there was some stuff that I did know about and I got to learn more about, but then there was also some things that I had no idea about, like faction fighting, sweat houses. I think this is the fact that stuck with me the most. So obviously we all know that Irish people are obsessed with potatoes, or at least we certainly were when it was like our main crop. And then obviously, we had the Gerta Moor, the Great Hunger and all of that. But the crazy thing is this was the level of our reliance on potatoes. Women used to eat 5 kg of potatoes a day and men 6.4 kg on average. So I just want you to picture like actually how much potatoes that is. One of those big bags that you buy in the shops, that's 1 kg. Imagine eating 5 of those a day. Like, I mean, I'll take it. I love potatoes. I'd be very happy with that. But yeah, let's introduce Deirdre, and I'm very excited to get into today's one. I think we're going to learn a lot, and it's going to be a really, really enjoyable listen. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next one. Deirdre O'Neill is the creator of the Remnants of Our Past project, using various media accounts to satisfy her own huge interest in Irish heritage, history, arts, and crafts. She's married with 3 children, and this is her first book. Deirdre, you're so welcome to How to Be Irish. How are you getting on today?
Thanks a million for having me, Una. I'm getting on great. Thanks a lot.
Brilliant. Well, I was reading your book last night and I absolutely loved it. I'm just very curious. So, obviously, Remnants of Our Past, the book itself has come from your Instagram account of the same name. I'd love to hear about how you started that project and how it grew into a book.
So, I didn't have a TikTok account or anything like that prior to COVID. And when COVID hit, the kids they were teenagers at the time, and they were, all talking about TikTok. And there was a few days where I was on, the usual walking circuit or jogging in the local area. Let's say within 2 kilometers. And I'd pass little things on the wall or little historical objects, and I'd either wonder what they were or I'd know what they were, and I'd wonder whether other people knew what they were. So I suppose the very first historical video that I made was I saw a horse ring on the wall of the local church, and I took a little video of it. And that night I just put it up onto TikTok, and I put the caption, "We walk past remnants of our past every day without noticing." And then I explained what it was. And I woke up the next morning and it was really successful video, and it really resonated with people, and they really loved it, and the younger people loved it as well. So anytime I'd be out, I'd do a little video, and a little object that we literally walk past and we don't notice it. And it's been there, it might have been intrinsic to our ancestors' lives years ago. Like a horse ring is where they would have tied the horses up to go into mass. And so it'd be like the modern day car park. But of course, we just don't use it now. We don't notice it. It's just a rusty object on the wall. So it kind of built from that then. Anytime I'd go to a historical site or, anything even in town, in Dublin city centre, I'd make a little video and put it up. And it just grew and grew. And then I went onto Instagram, and that grew even faster. And now I think there's something like 400,000 followers across all the social media platforms: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube. So it's really resonated with people, and I really enjoy doing it then as well.
I came across your account a good while ago, And I found, I mean, also with this podcast for me, what I found is that people have this real curiosity and they really want to develop their interest in our own Irish heritage and culture. My first episode that I did in this season was about stone lifting. I know you have a piece in the book on stone lifting. I was chatting to Andy Downs all about that. And I mean, it's just absolutely fascinating stuff. Like, I know we only had an hour to chat, but like you could have talked about it for hours on end in itself. There's so many other things as well that I found that I'd never heard of before. And I think one of them, which probably stood out to me the most, was faction fighting. Could you tell me a little bit more about that and where it came from?
Yeah, so fact fighting was a big social thing in the kind of 18th and 19th centuries in Ireland. So it would be the Irish people would basically settle disputes amongst themselves by fighting, and fighting meaning they had really heavy sticks. Sometimes the sticks would be loaded with lead, lead inserted in them. And they'd basically knock each other's blocks off with the sticks. They'd wear padded caps with, straw to try and protect their skulls. But the fights would be organised. They'd know that they were going to be fighting that day. It would be usually at the local fair, or the Patron, which was the feast of the patron saint of the village or town. And the excitement would kind of build as it became time for the faction fight to happen, which would usually be later in the day. And one faction's leader, they both had leaders, and one leader would, throw the jacket kind of sort of down on the ground, and if the other leader stood on it, that would be the challenge accepted. And then they'd fight in, swathes of lines, back and forward, and hit each other. And there was lots of murders at faction fights. And like the British authorities would turn a blind eye to it, and they would just let the Irish settle the disputes themselves that way, and they wouldn't get involved because, of course, when you know you think your enemy is the next village or the next faction, it takes the focus away from what was going on at a kind of a wider level. So yeah, there was some murders and really horrific fights. There was one in Cork where there was 30 people murdered, and there was a big one in Ballinhassig in Cork then, where it was actually the authorities shot into the crowd and killed them. So yeah, it was really violent stuff.
You mentioned the Pattern there. So the Pattern being the feast day or the saints day of that local village. It was like a big event as part of the year, wasn't it?
Yeah, sometimes it could be a part of a fair. The fair might happen on the Patron, but yeah, the Patron was a big social event, and like there was people came from far and wide to patrons. They might travel across the country as well to go to a Patron, and it would usually kind of centre at the Holy Well in an area, and they would have certain ways that they would go around the Holy Well and pray, and you know kneel at a certain stone or turn right at a certain other stone, or there was certain things that they had to do for that particular area. And it was like a big occasion for social events and socializing and catching up with other people, and there was a bit of romance there as well. They'd get carried away with themselves, and they'd take water home from the Holy Well, to bless their animals with. They might down in Gougane down in Cork, they swam their animals through the water to the lake there, to the Holy Well and the church that was on the island. So through the lake, the animals would swim. They'd put holy water up the animals' noses, and they'd bring bits home, like they might bring a leaf home from the tree at the well, or they might bring some water home. And like the water would have sick people in it, as well as people bottling up the water to sell as well. So it's fairly manky in
Yeah.
that context as well.
They either had unbelievable immune systems or awful ones.
Yeah, I'd say they had a lot of challenges to their immune systems.
Yeah, and as you mentioned there, the holy wells were very important. Like people would come from far and wide to try and avail of their magical properties or their holy properties, I should say, really. What are some of the famous ailments or cures that these wells and other I suppose landmarks or items that they would have used to help them in the time?
So water from the well was a big thing, and lots of holy wells from across the country would have a cure for warts, or a cure for eye ailments. And that was a big thing. The eye ailments were Um, and when you think of it, it's very practical because in the houses they didn't have running water. They had dirty, smoky houses. They didn't have the kind of clean environments that we have now. So they would have had like itchy, infected eyes. And of course, when you go to a holy well, you're going to be able to wash or any well at all. But, obviously the holy well is the one that got the name for having a cure. And they would wash their eyes with the water. And of course it would improve things. There's loads of wells that I've documented in the book. And there's a holy well in Cork called Whitewell or Our Lady's Well. And that was a very, very famous well where people would travel from all across the country to come there, thousands of people. It's called Whitewell because there's a lovely whitewashed wall around the well and there's a tree growing out of the wall. And in the book, I've got like an old photo of it versus the current photo, and you can really see how much the tree has grown in the 100 years. It's just such a beautiful spot. But that has a cure of people. You know, I think one woman got cured of deafness, and another got cured of lameness. And the boy who got cured of lameness, his father swore that he'd come back every single year to leave something at the well. And then the story kind of ends where he hadn't come back, which I thought was really sad. And then the woman who was cured, she gave a present of a statue of Holy Mary, which I think is the one. It must be the one that's there now at the moment because it fits the description perfectly. There was a well in Galway, St. Augustine's Well, where a boy, I think it was in the 17th century, there was a young boy who was so near death, like he couldn't eat or anything, that they were making preparations for his funeral, and he was brought to St. Augustine's Well, and he was submerged in the water, and he had this vision when he was there, that he kind of learned what he was to do. He was to go around it a certain amount of times, and he did that for 9 days, and then he was cured. And again, it was taken with such seriousness by the authorities that they did a big investigation into it and everything. So there's these documented cures, whether we want to believe them or not, but they were what they believed at the time.
And do you know what they found when they did that investigation into the well?
Well, they didn't find, like, it most certainly wasn't a scam. He was near death, and he did get cured. It was just such a,
Mm.
I suppose you'd probably call it they were thinking it was a miracle, basically. So they didn't discredit him, put it that way.
I wonder what the reasoning for this is. Like, is there something special in the water? Is there a particular mineral present there? Like, do you have any thoughts on that,
Yeah,
Deirdre?
well, no, I do, yeah, because in Kerry there's a well, and it's Tubernagalt, and there's actually been lithium found in that water. Now, people would have gone there and they would have spent, it's such a tiny amount of lithium, that, and lithium being what's in medicine now, even now these days, to treat mental illness. They found very, very low levels of lithium in this well, but they think that it was because people went there to stay for several months and were drinking the water on a consistent basis, that perhaps it it may have actually physically been something that helped them. And also in Leitrim, and in many wells across Ireland, sometimes you'll see they're bright orange, and kind of like fluffy, sort of have a kind of a fluffy iron deposit in the water. It kind of looks a little bit like scum within the stones of it, but it's actually iron, and it's called a chalybeate well, which would have been something that they would have used for spas in the 19th century as well. And again, like iron, can really help you with tiredness and that kind of sickness. So
Hmm.
there could well have been an actual physical thing in the water that did help them.
I definitely believe that. I know that there was a story, and you documented in your book. I'd heard it beforehand, but it's of a priest's grave, and this seems to be a recurring thing where people would go and they'd pick the clay or the soil of the grave of somebody, and they ran some tests on this soil, and they found that it had some kind of a microbiological like essence to it that essentially meant that it was going to be like an antibiotic or something.
That's it. Yeah, they're actually using it at the moment to do experiments for medication to fight MRSA. So this was a grave in Boho Cemetery up in Fermanagh, and it's Father McGeer, who died in 1803, I think it was, or the early 19th century, anyways, when he died. But he was a healer in his life, and he said to his congregation, when I die, the clay that's in my grave is going to be the cure. Same as I can heal you in life, it will heal you. So there's a tradition in this boho cemetery in Fermanagh, and there's also there's spoons all around the grave. So you take some clay from his grave, and you're allowed to take it because it's written on a sign, and the spoons are put out for the purpose. You put it in a cotton bag or a pouch, and you not to meet anybody on the way. You go home, put it under your pillow, and then you come back. I think it's 3 or 4 days later for that one, and you replace it in there, which is obviously why it's still
Mm.
full of soil. And yeah, you're supposed to get the cure. And I've tracked down quite a few graves like that, and areas like that, and holy wells even that have blessed clay in it. And it was something that was like heavily believed in. So they would bring it on journeys with them. So there's Garton clay in Donegal is a white clay, and they would bring that on journeys with them. And then there's another clay from Kilcummin in County Mayo, and again that's linked to Saint Cummins, who was associated with that place. And that blessed clay can only be lifted by members of I think it's the Mahon and the Lockery families, because they were the names of the two people who found the saint when he was a baby. Their cow kept going to the same stone and licking it, and then when they went to investigate, they found the baby and they raised him. So there's all real like in intricate traditions linked with these places. But there was a woman, an emigrant, who had some of that clay, and she was on a ship emigrating, and the ship got like really badly trapped in a storm. And the tradition is that you can use the clay to, throw out the storm and calm the seas. And she did this, and it calmed the seas to the point that the captain of the ship was trying to buy it from her. And this poor emigrant who had no money and was going to a new country refused the offer. The clay was much more important to her than that. And then another way that clay could be consecrated would be the local priest would bless clay for use in penal times when he himself couldn't be at a funeral. So he would provide the locality with a bit of consecrated clay, and they would have it. And there's an account from Leitrim where they had a little wicker basket it was kind of oval with a hole in it, and in it they'd have a bit of blessed clay and a cross, and certain things that they would need for a funeral. So it would be like the little funeral kit of the local area. So when the priest couldn't come to the grave because there might have been a priest catcher trying to catch him, they would use this clay, which was a good replacement for not having the priest there, and they were able to put it into the coffin with the dead person maybe under his head, or his or her head. And there's an account from a workhouse then, I think it was in Cork, where the guardians of the workhouse could find no trace that the ground for the ground where they were burying their inmates had ever been consecrated. So what they did to mitigate that was they put a bit of blessed clay into the under the head of the dead person in the coffin, instead of burying them in consecrated ground. That was kind of regarded as being
Next best
um
thing.
the next best thing at the time. Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Well, they should have
Wow.
really got the ground consecrated for them,
Yeah.
shouldn't they? But
Yeah, interesting. I remember there was one section, and you were talking about how they would have this stand where they could put the coffin, and it would be kind of like on the way to the grave. Could you explain that?
yeah. So they had traditions for everything, really. So for a funeral, they would have. their rituals for the wake first of all in the house. But on the way, then when they were bringing the coffin to the graveyard, they had a set route, so it had to go this same route every time, and there was no shortcuts allowed. It had to go this way, and on that route, like when you think of it, there would have been a few men carrying the coffin, and they'd walk fairly fast. Like it wasn't like today when we carry a coffin a few feet, and you go slow. Back then they might have had 5 miles to walk to the graveyard, and they would have walked at a walking pace of 5 or 6 miles an hour with the coffin on their shoulders, but they would have swapped between groups of men. So the next batch of men would take over while they were still walking. But then there was certain points on the route where they'd they'd rest the coffin. And in most areas, they didn't put the coffin on the ground. Now there is some records where there would be a holy place where they would put the coffin on the ground, but generally they would keep the coffin up and they would put it on a special stone that was allocated for that reason, or a special cairn, which is like a triangular kind of pile of stones, say, or so something for the purpose of resting the coffin, and that would be known as now as like a coffin rest or a coffin stone. And these would have been or could possibly have been linked with so say a cairn could have grown there because somebody possibly might have died there during the famine or had an accident there. Sometimes at the side of a road, if somebody died, they would mark that spot with a stone, and then the next person would put another stone, and then it would kind of be thought to help people in the afterlife, by giving them this stone as a memorial every time. Or they would plant a hawthorn tree on the spot as well, or both. So that could possibly be then the place where they would rest the coffin on the way to the funeral, for the villagers. And then the wall of the graveyard as well might have a coffin rest, or a flat area where you could pass the coffin over the stile, and rest it on top. And then when you were in the graveyard itself, you would have certain traditions to get to the grave. You might have to go by the wall and around, or you might, if there was an old ruined church, and you might have to go and dip it into a certain point that's on the ground. So every area had its own tradition. And I found really, like, I tracked loads of these down, and I tracked cairns down that aren't even recorded on the National Register. And I think the saddest, I felt really sad one day when I had found one of these greens in the National Folklore Collection, where it was saying that there's this green triangle of grass outside the graveyard, and they carry the coffin around it 3 times, and then they go in, and I went and I found the place, and I found the graveyard, and outside the graveyard was just a junction. And I asked an old person in a house, and he told me that the road had been widened, so the green had been taken away. And I just felt really sad that, like, these traditions that were there for hundreds of years can just be kind of taken away by roadworks that don't know anything about the history of it. And there's another stone down in near Old Town, down in the back roads there in County Dublin. And there's a stone outside, like, that's associated with St. Patrick, where he's supposed to have tethered his horse through the hole in it. But the stone was taken away by the county council because they were put tarmac in the road, and the stone was, like, just taken away because it was a stone embedded in the road. And of course, the local area kicked up a fuss, and the stone was put back. But it's just luckily they caught it that time, where it it wasn't completely gone. But it just shows that, like, if there's not a proper register of these things that is actually consulted by the workers and the county councils properly, then it's a massive problem for our country, because this is culture that we need to protect now.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank God we had the Dukas archive, the National Folklore Archive, to like be able to tie up all of these stories and explain some things and be able to bring it back into our front of our minds.
It's a treasure trove. It's like surfing on the web. It's like you go onto the National Folklore Collection, and your listeners should know it's publicly accessible and it's online, and you don't need an account. You literally just go on to Duca's National Folklore Collection, Google it, go into the search bar and just put in whatever you want, and it
Hmm.
brings it back, and then that leads to something else, and that leads to something else. So it's really really a treasure trove. But as our old books as well, and the archives, and it's all there if we go looking for
Mm.
it.
And our language as well. There's so much within that. Our language being very much one that is connected to nature and the land and the sea and can tell us so much more about it than we probably know in some way, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And there's I've tried to record some place names, kind of link them to some of the subjects in the book as well, because there's things hidden in plain sight by the name of the town.
Yeah.
If it's to do with bullying, which is, where they move cattle around, there might be a Bowley Hill, or a Bula something, or it's intriguing actually.
Yeah, just on the bullying actually. So I feel like I have heard of this before, but I couldn't remember what it was. But when I was reading about it, I was like, this is like the original remote work, really, isn't it?
So basically, cattle were a massive part of our livelihood. And of course, the land that we rented as well was very important for growing, crops, potatoes and whatever on the land. And you don't want your cattle to be in with your crops when they're grown in the summertime, or, in the better seasons. So what they used to do was they got the younger generation in the village, usually the girls, and they got them to go off with the cattle up into the mountains, and it would be the usual spots. Like it wasn't just any old wander. It was, to the Boolean pastures, and they would go there, where rent wasn't payable. You see, so it was a commonage, and the cattle would feed on whatever the grass that was growing up there. But there would be little boolie huts. So the practice was called bullying, and it was always within, you know a certain amount of miles of the village. It didn't go too far, and there was boolie huts there, and they would live in these boolie huts, and they had the stories were that they had great crack because they were away from the constraints of the village and the elders, and they were just up in the mountains, having fun.
Mm.
And the reason the girls used to go is because now boys did go as well, but the girls would go because they were responsible for milking the cows and making the butter.
Mm.
So they would do that when they were up in the mountain, and then they would put the milk into a stream, in a container in a stream to keep it cool
Hmm.
while they were waiting. Or they would make butter, and they might bury the butter as well. So it's thought that for, over the centuries, that they think this is going right back for many centuries to ancient times. And sometimes now they find bog butter. So buried in the bog, and it's still perfectly preserved. And they think it could be because somebody buried the bog butter and didn't remember
I
where it
forgot.
was, because all the bog looks the same when you're in it, like,
Yeah.
yeah. I've got nearly got lost a couple of times in bogs, when we were tracking through to take photos for the book.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, it's a very kind of a stark landscape at times,
Yeah,
particularly in the winter.
yeah, it's beautiful, and it's it's very charming. It's charming when you can go back to your car.
Mm.
Yeah, they did their best. They didn't own land. They rented it in common. So they kind of all rented the same group of land, from the landlord, and then they worked in partnership and they farmed that land together.
It was very much a community effort, wasn't it? And I suppose the idea of mehel, which was the idea that like if somebody had something that needed to be done, everyone would come in and they'd help that person out. But then when someone else needed something else done, they'd all go help that other person. And it was all kind of, it was very much like a community effort, wasn't it, when it came to these things?
Yeah, like mehel it's an Irish word, and it means work party. So they would they would all work together on somebody's crops and try and get them all in at the one time. And then, as you say, they'd go to the next one and help them. Or if they had to do turf out in the bog, they'd go out and cut the turf, foot the turf. Fishing as well was another one of a community effort. They fished together. They barked the nets together, which means that they boiled it in a certain substance that would preserve it, because the nets were kind of cotton and natural
Mhm.
fibres, so they had to preserve it. And the nets were like could weigh a ton each, so they couldn't possibly do it on their own. They had to do it as a group. A lot of the time they owned the things together. There was this farming practice called Rundale. They didn't necessarily call it Rundale at the time. We kind of call it Rundale now, but they might have just thought it was their way of life as such. But so the whole area rented a bit of, the village land from the landlord. And then they would fairly distribute it. So they would each have a pocket of the best land and each have a pocket of the midland. And then if if there was a risk of flooding, for example, at least then each year that would change ownership and it wouldn't always be the same person flooding. And they would sometimes own a plough together. And that could mean a hand plough. It doesn't necessarily mean, they they'd share all those daily tasks. So it was very, very, very much based on community partnership.
Yeah, no, it's great to see. I mean, I suppose they were so poor, and they really just had to be quite savvy in the way that they approach things. Often very sustainable. I noted a lot of points you made around how they would repurpose a lot of things. Where they went out, they picked a lot of seaweed, or with food as well. Like I remember that you're talking about this drink that they made from oats. I mean, very unappealing, but apparently it was a bit of a delicacy.
Well, yeah, it was. They would basically ferment the oats, so they would put oats, but they didn't waste anything. You see, so they put oats and they put the oat hulls in water, and they would leave it to ferment. And what the oat hulls were, they called it oat seeds, but they were the hulls that were left after the oat was separated. So it was after it was milled, so could otherwise potentially go in the bin maybe these days. But yeah, the milk, they humorously called it bull's milk, because it wasn't actually like from a cow. It
Yeah.
was like oat milk. But it was very, very sustaining and very refreshing. And actually, they define it now as fermented food is really, really good for your gut. So their guts would have been really healthy. They made oat cakes as well, which was oats and hot water and salt, and they would dry that out in a cake shape. And they could bring that on their journeys to America because it wouldn't spoil. It was a hard kind of a dried out cake, and that would be.
Sounds lovely.
Yeah, it sounds well. Look, yeah, it's all they had. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Like you were mentioning a bit of fishing there earlier. Like they had to do a lot of preserving of the fish because the waters were a bit rough. They could kind of only fish certain times a year, and then of course they needed to be able to eat all year round. Obviously, the people were very reliant on the potato. I remember reading you said that women would eat about 5 kg of potatoes a day, which that really shocked me. Like that is a lot of potatoes. But obviously, when the potatoes got blight, they suddenly couldn't have their 5 kg of potatoes per day. And a lot of people ask, why didn't we as an island nation fish more? Why were we not able to survive on fish during the Great Hunger?
Well, I suppose first of all, fishing was a more of a summer activity because when you think about the oceans around Ireland, in the winter, they're very, very hard to get to get out on safely. And we had traditional fishing boats called currachs, which are very light. They're great for our coastline, but for summer fishing more so. And there was a lack of investment by the British government in Irish fishing, so we didn't really have the harbours that we could just land at the way we can today. So the currachs would have to come up and land on a beach or that type of thing. So it was really difficult to fish at any time other than the summer. And unfortunately, when the English fishing vessels would fish in Irish waters and they would actually sell it back to us, which is it just seems so unfair, doesn't it?
Mm.
But like then there was the availability of the fish then as well. So for example, in Connemara near Renville, there was no fish between 1810 and 1822. And of course, local superstition, comes into it, where they were saying that there was a drowning tragedy in 1809, and therefore the fish didn't come back. But of course, we probably would think that it's because of natural
Mm.
reasons. And then in 1862, there's another example where severe storms and rough seas just made the herring disappear in the west coast, where the official papers described that as the fishing industry was dying out and the boats were seen lying idle on the beach. So we kind of assume now that there's loads of fish, it's an island and that, but there might not have been fish for various times, and then obviously in the winter as well. But then during the Great Hunger, there was lots of things that got in the way. So from the 1830s, the British government had established Coast Guard stations around the Irish coastline. They were tasked with controlling access to the sea and the use of the sea, the resources in the sea. And if you were caught breaching that control, you could have your fishing equipment confiscated. So, like in 1847, that was the worst year of the Great Hunger. 13 currachs were confiscated by the Coast Guard, and then the people pawned their fishing gear as well. So it was really really tough for them.
I suppose they were also probably very weak as well, and going fishing would have required a lot of energy. And I think I read as well that, the people who were wanted to fish inland on the rivers and lakes, that they were often private lands and they weren't allowed to trespass there, and they would get a lot of trouble for that as well. So it kind of seemed that, like, it was very much structurally very challenging, if not impossible, for them to go out and get fish during this time.
Yeah, it was, everything was stacked against them. There was in Waterford, there was the Waterford Harbour's huge, really, really huge harbour, really wide stretch of water. And there was these weirs called Scotch weirs. They imported Scotchmen to run these weirs. That's what they're called, Scotch weirs. And they were basically, they're V-shaped infrastructure in the harbour bed. And each pole that's driven into the silt is a pine tree trunk. So it's a massive big thing, and so there's lots of trunks all making this kind of V-shaped trap as such, and then they would have nets attached to it, and that caught fish both on the ebb and flow tide. So whether the salmon were going upstream or downstream, it would catch them. Even the tiniest little fish like sprats wouldn't fit through them. So it meant that the salmon couldn't go upstream to procreate or whatever. So they couldn't go upstream. And then that obviously affected all the fishermen up the river as well. And then in the Grey Hunger as well, the fishermen were attacking the Scotch weirs, trying to cut them down and that. And again, their cots, which are the name of their boats down on the shore, they were confiscated from them for 3 fishing seasons as well. So, like, you can't win.
No, you really, really can't. Something else that jumped out to me in the book, Deirdre, where I'd not heard of these before, and I did not know that we had them, but we're obviously very, very big fan of them now, and that is saunas. But many, many, many years ago in Ireland, we had our own version of saunas called sweat houses, and it is believed that they even do predate the Vikings. So it wasn't necessarily something that was brought down from Scandinavia.
Yeah, like there's various theories, but there's a sweat house over in Inishfallen Island in Sligo there, where it matches the rest of the 6th century buildings. So they think that was dated back to the 6th century, and that's still called Chocan Eilish locally,
Mm.
which is sweat house in Irish. And then I think it's up the north somewhere, there was a sweat house that was dated to the 5th century from charred wood that was found there. So yeah, they carve and dated that one. So like they do have physical evidence that they think that it's even older again. And so basically what a sweat house was is it's a small little stone structure, and it had a corbelled roof. So basically the roof that kind of goes in and in further, and stack the stones on top of each other on the top. And sometimes they could be covered with sod to kind of keep in the heat. So basically they'd light a fire there's a little door to go into it, and one of the records that I found just describes it like a bread oven, so like a man-shaped bread oven, I
Hmm.
suppose, and they'd light it with whatever fuel they had, so maybe turf or furs, and they would, or wood or whatever, and they would heat the space on the inside, and then when it was really nice and hot, they'd scoop out all the kind of charred wood, and then they'd line it with rushes. And people then would crawl in naked, is the records that I found, naked or lightly clad, and they would sit on either stone seats that were in there, or they'd like bring in a little thing to sit on, maybe a basket or something like that, and they would stay in there for hours. And so basically, what they were was, before hospitals were in local villages, so there was nowhere to go if you had a really bad rheumatism or aches and pains or respiratory problems. This was basically the cure for that. And even today, when I put a video up about sweat houses and I'm chatting to people in the comments, people that suffer from rheumatism find great relief going to a sauna. So
Hmm.
it does physically work.
Yeah.
And the seasons that they use these sweat houses was usually the turn of the seasons. So say, coming into spring and coming into autumn, where people do actually suffer much more at that stage with them.
Yeah.
And they would crawl into the sweat house, and they'd be sealed in. So they'd be sealed in with there was a 17th century visitor that witnessed it, where they sealed it in with wood and dung. So like there's no air going in there, and
Jesus.
the people would be locked in. And then when they were ready to come out a few hours later, they would either snuggle up and go to bed, or they might go into water, cool water that was nearby.
Hmm.
So again, they're all the same sort of things we do now. We
Yeah.
still go into the cool plunge after the sauna.
I don't like the idea though of it getting closed over and not being able to get out. It's a bit
No,
scary.
no, because when you go to a sauna, there's only so much you can take, isn't there?
Yeah.
Like, and yeah,
You want to be able to
yeah.
get out like when you just feel like it's just
When
that
when you
point
need
too
to,
much. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. But Deirdre, I just wanted to ask you more generally, when you are going around Ireland and you're looking at all of these different remnants that you've come across and written about, have you noticed any kind of pattern around where you find them in Ireland? Is there any particular parts where you've found more than others, or is it just pretty much spread evenly throughout?
Well, funnily enough, actually, there's quite a lot in the book about Leitrim,
Mm.
and that's I don't really know. I don't really know how that transpired, because I didn't particularly go looking for Leitrim. Like, Leitrim would be known as being there's quite a frequent amount of sweat houses in Leitrim and that area. So, and they think possibly that they were all, now there's, sorry, the sweat houses all over the country still, but there's a particular concentration in Leitrim, and they think it might be possibly because that's just where things hadn't got cleared as fast as other areas, maybe like
Mm.
the agriculture. But yeah, like I've tracked a couple of stories down to do with lifting stones to Leitrim,
Hmm.
and the sweat houses and the holy wells and that, yeah. So, and then Cork and Kerry would have quite a few stories in it as well.
That you might have been from Munster or something, because there actually was a lot of Cork and Kerry.
Yeah, no, I'm a Dub, and I live in Dublin, so
Yeah.
it's just where it brought me. But actually, I have most counties covered in the book,
Hmm.
and there's very few counties that I didn't get to, like right up to Donegal, Antrim, right down to Kerry.
Hmm.
There's quite a bit about Kilkenny in it, So there's a really good spread, and it's even though I might have found a remnant in one county, it's the story applies to the whole country. It's just that
Yeah.
that particular remnant just still remains. It doesn't mean it's centered on that one place or anything like that, because everything in the book is quite general, you know.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Of course. Now, with all of your research done, I want to ask you the question that I ask all of my guests. For you, what does it mean to be Irish?
When I think about being Irish, I physically feel a tightening in my stomach and chest, when I think how much I love being Irish, and how much I love our culture and our values. I think there's a lot of elements to what it means to be Irish, but I'll pull a couple of aspects out that kind of surface time and time again when I was researching the book, and that's our empathy and our hospitality. So many topics that I explored it, touch on the challenges, as I was saying throughout this podcast, the challenges that our island faced over the centuries, living under the effects of colonization. And we were plundered and we were unfairly treated under another country's laws and rule for many generations. And I think that's contributed a lot to who we are now. Like, as a general rule and as a nation, I think we have an empathy that's rare. And I think we're consistently on the side of the underdog.
Hmm.
Um, and then in terms of our hospitality, I don't think we're known as the land of 100,000 welcomes for nothing.
Hmm.
We've been known as that from times of ancient history, like under Brehon law, which was our native Irish laws before English rule. It was the duty of each household to welcome strangers that were travelling through. And, travellers could expect food, shelter, safety, and they'd be under the host protection where they stayed. And then in the old records that I consulted when I was researching for the book, which would have included books written in the 19th century or earlier by visitors to Ireland, so they commonly document the welcome that they received. And one that particularly stands out for me is Asenath Nicholson's Ireland's Welcome to a Stranger, it's called. And she visited Ireland just before the famine. And she's a remarkable woman. She solo travelled around the country, mostly on foot. And she documented appalling poverty all over in every area that she went to. She'd arrive in a village late at night, having walked for 20 miles that day, and her feet would be cut to ribbons. And she'd call into a cabin and they'd give her a place to stay, even though they had nothing. And they'd give her a potato to eat, or more than one potato. And she'd offer to pay them, and they'd always refuse payment. I don't think there's any story in the book where they took the payment. So even though they were living in dire poverty, they welcomed her. And then, of course, when Irish Americans visit here, like, what they regard Ireland as their homeland, and we welcome them because, like, in the book, I tell the story about the American Wake, which is the traditions that the Irish people would have gone through just before the migrant would go to America. And so for Irish Americans, their ancestors had to leave to find a better life out of the severe poverty that was here at the time. And I think when you leave Ireland, your love for your country takes on a different perspective, and a longing for home. And that's carried down through the generations. And I really experienced this welcome, like, as I was saying, like when I was traveling around Ireland, I was knocking on like so many doors and I was trying to find out information from people about something that I might have tracked down in an old record. And I'd call to a house in really, really, really rural locations. They wouldn't at all be used to people dropping in or ringing the bell or knocking on the door. And I was never refused assistance. They'd point me to the next house down the hill and they'd say, he'll know, that's his land or whatever. So anytime I cold called or emailed anybody, they always helped me. So I think it's in our DNA, or maybe it's a folk memory that we hold from ancient times. But I think we're generally a hospitable people.
Hmm.
So I think what it means to be Irish is having a natural empathy for those suffering persecution, offering a welcome to strangers and taking the time to help those who need it.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Deirdre. I really appreciate that. And thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Best of luck with the book. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what you do next, what else you might be researching and writing about and posting on social media. If anyone wants to find you online and have a look at your content, where can they find you and what should they look up?
So my tag is at Remnants of Our Past in Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and it's at Remnants of Our Past official on Facebook.
Brilliant.
So
Perfect.
thanks for having me, Una. I've really enjoyed it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Gur mila mila mahagat, Deirdre.
Gur maith agat, Una. Slán.